Okay, good evening, everyone. Welcome. This is the Town of Somers Zoning Board of Appeals meeting. The date is July 16th, 2019. Denise, would you please take the roll?
Mr. Carpenetto?
Here.
Ms. DiPolito?
Here.
Mr. Hardin?
Here.
Mr. Newman?
Here.
Chairman Canistra?
Here.
Thank you.
I'd request everybody stand for the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, everyone. First item on the agenda this evening is that of Margaret Gambecki and Madeline Minucci. This is an application for an area variance for less than the required lot size for a pre-existing non-conforming two-family dwelling for a two-story addition. The agendas may say second-story addition. It should read two-story addition in an R40 residential district at 15 Stonewall Drive, Granite Springs, New York. Is there someone here is the applicant here or someone to represent?
No.
Sir, if you could just go up to the microphone there, just give us your name and address, and if you could just describe the application before us.
My name is Chris Shara, CS Construction representing. I live 2911 Gomer Street in Yorktown.
Okay.
The application is for to meet the zoning because part of that property was originally back in the day when the great-grandfather owned it, sectioned off to the neighbor next door when he owned a lot of the land. So what happened was this falls under the what I believe is the new zoning, 40,000 square feet.
It's an R40 district.
It's an R40.
40,000.
By adding the back garage, we're using up part of the property.
So you have a lot coverage issue is what you're talking
Correct.
about here. Okay. Tom, it looks like the existing lot per the plan here is about 21,400 square feet. Is that what I'm looking at here?
Are you looking at the zoning code?
Well, I'm looking at the plan, basically the site plan provided by the applicant, and they're saying that this is an R40 district, but it looks like there's only 21,471 square feet for this particular lot.
That's accurate.
That is accurate. Okay. Principal building can cover 6% of a 40,000 square foot lot, so I assume the problem comes in here because they're at 3.2, want to go to 4.32%, but the lot is a little bit more than half the size. Is that where the issue comes in here? Okay. Okay. Sir, the addition, it's a two-story addition. It's a garage, and is there something above the garage?
Yeah, what we're doing is we're actually raising the roof to get the height upstairs. There's no living room on the second floor. It's the bedrooms just outside the kitchen. So we're going to add the garage. It's 14 feet back, and we're going to move the bedrooms back to create the living room where they are existing. The porch, there's going to be a porch on the back area, so not all of it's living space. If you've noticed, the 14 feet is a garage underneath.
Do we have interior plans?
I do.
Do we?
Yeah, we do not. Yeah, it's kind of hard to visualize from the site plan what we're talking about here.
Let me just go right to the page.
That'd be great.
If you'll notice, this is the new addition, the 14 feet going back. That's at basement level. It's all grade, coming off the road. Then, if you'll notice on the first floor, this is here now. It's
Right.
getting moved over the garage. Can you all
Okay.
see that?
Okay, so you're putting in a garage on the first floor, and then there's a living area with maybe a bathroom on the second floor?
It's the bedroom, walk-in closet, and bathroom that's here is being moved to the garage.
Okay, so you're just moving it over.
So what I was saying before, above that, for the second floor is just gonna be a screen porch. And I can go to that page if you're all okay with that.
You're talking about for the, because the porch is
This
to the
is
left.
first floor.
Right, this is first floor.
This is basement level.
Okay.
Okay.
Oh, so that's first floor?
Yep.
Then where's the garage?
Basement.
There's an existing one right here.
Okay.
We're adding one to the back of the house.
Oh, I see, at the basement level. you're
At the
doing-
basement level.
Okay, now
Because
I understand.
everything's grade to the street.
The garage is buried.
The garage is level with the road. The existing garage.
Have elevation on
The elevation's probably showing, you'll notice here, let me make this a little neater here.
it? Okay.
See this elevation, existing garage, see the stairs up to the first floor?
I see. Okay, now.
Okay, so we're putting a garage here. We're gonna take this back and do a porch up here.
And just move that there.
That's why we're raising the roof.
Okay.
You know, the old style house, all the
Right.
ceilings are low.
And what's going to fill in where you moved from?
I don't understand the
Well,
question.
you moved,
This is all open back here. It's all yard.
yeah, I know, so you're moving back. I understand that. And what is going to replace where you used to be?
The garage is staying. The existing garage,
Yeah,
that's staying.
But I
So it's
think
gonna be two-car garage.
yeah.
you're adding a garage, and what I think he's asking is that, you said there's a bedroom there that's being moved back with the bathroom, what's gonna replace
Right
it?
now, it's just an old porch.
Right, but you're moving a bedroom and bathroom into
We're gonna
there,
slide it back.
and the space so you slide it back,
Yeah.
what goes in the space that,
Living room.
you're just gonna have a living room
A
there?
living room.
Because there's no living room in the.
Right, so you're not adding any bedrooms to the house?
No,
Okay,
keeping, conforming to what it is.
okay, because we'd have Board of Health issues and
course.
things like that.
Of course, and when we talked about the second floor, it's raising the roof, because you got the dormers
I see
coming
that,
down. We're taking all the dormers off.
right,
Get full ceiling height in the bedrooms.
okay, that's helpful. The deck, is that just a one-story deck
Yes.
off the first floor?
That's coming off, right?
Right. We don't have any proximity issues with septic fields, well heads, anything like that?
No. Everything conforms.
This is a two-family home,
Big
No.
two-family, correct.
fully rented, no owners living on the
No,
property.
no, this is just the owners, they're here tonight. It's a family home. Right now, nobody lives there because they use it as a summer family house.
But it's used as a one-family residence at this point in time?
No, I mean, it's two, but no, they don't rent it or anything. I thought that was the question, if they rent, they do not, nor do they intend to.
So it's a two-family dwelling, where, which is a non-conforming.
Right.
Pre-existing non-conforming is what we have here. Is that
Yeah,
right,
and it
Tom?
was pre-existing non-conforming because they were already over the lot area that they were covering. Now they're going to be more over. How much more over are you?
Now, it looks like they're moving from 3.27% to 4.3%.
Okay.
Double,
In the tr-
You-
But,
2,000.
Okay, about
But
2,000.
just remember, the reason the lot didn't conform, it was one of the original old farmhouses,
Right.
which obviously the house next door got part of that property. So when the architect designed this and we were working with the building department, he assumed it was grandfathered. And that's not the case when you're obviously adding on and building back.
But it's also non-conforming because it's a two-family, correct? You can't have a two-family in this district.
Well, yes, unless it predated.
Right.
The code, it's,
Right. You
Pre-existing the code.
You couldn't build or convert something in this district to a two-family now.
possibly that this board could prove that.
Right, without a variance.
right,
Correct.
right. It appears that they meet all the setbacks, because they do have 2 front yard issues here because they're on 2 streets, right?
My interpretation is you have one front yard.
You have 1 front yard?
Actually, on these streets, they're front 3 streets.
Oh, I see what you're saying, right.
Yeah. The front, in this application is Hollywood Place. That's their front yard.
That's where the driveway comes out.
No,
No, the driveway is gonna come out onto Stonewall Drive.
you see on Lake Drive there, are you,
Lake Drive.
if we're looking at the same thing, you see on Lake Drive, that's alongside the farm?
See, Lake Drive is also known as Stonewall Drive, I guess.
Right. That's
Stonewall Drive, that's what I was
Correct.
talking about.
Right.
I apologize, correct. You see the stone walls coming off Stonewall? There's 2 stone walls.
Yes.
Yes,
That's what we would consider a trellis. It's a vineyard over. That is the driveway into the garage, existing garage now.
See a picture.
yeah. So they're gonna be coming out here, though, you see, they're coming out onto Stonewall now. Oh, Stonewall, oh, why do you have Stonewall?
They're gonna be coming back this way.
Yeah, all right, so they're coming back.
Is there a
coming
driveway
into
now that
Stonewall this way.
enters onto Hollywood, or is that closed off?
No, there's not even a walk there.
There's no walk.
It's just all lawn.
It looks per the site plan like there's a walkway or something there.
Well, I mean, it's so grown over, it's,
Oh,
from,
okay.
from the old days. It's not an official concrete walk.
Okay.
Is that gonna get repaired as part of the project?
I'm sorry?
Is that gonna be repaired as part of the project?
To add all that, that's not, right now, we're just concerned with the house, getting new heating in the house and meeting the building codes. We're not really worried about the outside.
It looks that bad, you should.
If the proposed extension is allowed by the board, is this going to be a year-round residence?
Yes, the 2 families are going to live there.
They will.
Yeah. It's 2 sisters and their husbands. Obviously, they've always wanted to do this. Their dream was to do this house and live there.
Any other questions of the applicant, or before I go out to the audience, I want to see if anybody is here to comment? No? Okay. Does anybody here like to speak in regard to this application? Any comments, questions? Yes, ma'am, if you could just please come up and give us your name and address.
Oh, we know you.
Nancy Gravino, Granite Springs. I've lived there 56 years. I'm very familiar with the location, with the history of the house. If you want me to give you the history of the area and the milk that was picked up there and made into mozzarella, I can give you all that background. I have
I
no.
don't think that's necessary.
All
Thank you,
right.
though.
I have no opposition. I think this is very exciting, what's being done there. It actually fits in very well because if, like me, you've seen a lot of changes in this neighborhood, a lot of very large homes were built next to this. So it is architecturally fitting in very nice.
Okay.
Okay?
That's very helpful, because that's one of the questions we often have. Is the house, its appearance and size consistent with that of the neighborhood?
Absolutely.
Does anybody else wish to speak in regard to this application? Sir, have you had, or are you aware of any complaints from any neighbors or any issues from any neighbors, any concerns? Have been voiced to you?
I found the area to be very friendly, family friendly with all these people. It's really a nice thing up there they all have.
Right.
There's not going to be any problems. And it's I think one or two of the oldest houses that are due
Right.
for, upgrade. And we're going to keep the conformity, which they want to keep the stone look on the bottom foundation as well as the original stucco.
Right.
So we're looking to They add on to have all that conform.
So it doesn't look like an add-on?
They do not want it to.
Right. Good. Okay, good. Any other comments of the applicant? Any discussion the board wants to have? Any other questions? I think we're prepared to vote on this item. Anybody have any concerns with it? Okay, I think especially because it meets the setbacks and things like that, and consistent with the other houses in the neighborhood.
Yeah, sure.
You know, I think it's reasonable.
And then this could be a two-family rental. Once this is granted, this would continue to be available as a two-family rental in the future.
It's pre-existing, so, yeah, it's before the code. There's nothing we can do about that. It's grandfathered in. So, nothing we can do about that.
Is it grandfathered in as a rental?
Well, it's grandfathered in as a two-family residence. You know, whether the applicant decides to rent it someday, the owner, that's up to them.
Just one question that I have. As it is a two-family, does it have separate access doors for each family, or is it pretty
Yes.
much, it is?
Yes. The only thing we do have to do is the main entrance to the first floor. The staircase obviously doesn't meet the code width because it's such an old conforming then house. So all that's getting widened and a new staircase. But yes, they go through the front porch. There's two entrances.
Is the
Two separate.
new living room going to be a common space then?
Nope.
No?
No.
Okay. So there will be one family unit that does not have a living space?
No, they'll both have their own, but they'll enter. When you come in the front door, the stairs where I said I'm widening, you go in the first door when you get to the first landing. The other family goes upstairs into the second.
Okay.
It's actually there like that now. It's just that it doesn't conform to today's code.
Okay. Thank you.
Anything further? Are we ready to vote? Okay, can I have a motion as to the type of action?
I'll move it's type 2.
Second?
Mr. Carpinetto?
Aye.
Ms. DiPolito?
Aye.
Mr. Hardin?
Aye.
Mr. Newman?
Aye.
Chairman Canestra?
Aye.
Thank you.
Can I have a motion as to whether we're going to accept or deny the application as proposed?
I move that we accept the application as proposed.
Second?
Mr. Carpinetto?
Aye.
Ms. DiPolito?
Aye.
Mr. Hardin?
Aye.
Mr. Newman?
Aye.
Chairman Canestra?
Aye.
Thank you.
Congratulations, sir, your application is granted.
Thank you.
Thank you. Next item on the agenda this evening is that of Lori Ensinger and William Kubler. This is an application to appeal the building inspector's interpretation that the enclosed tennis courts on their property are not an office are not an office or studio, and therefore the use of the enclosed tennis courts on the property by a resident tennis professional teaching lessons and providing instruction and training to private students is not permitted by the town zoning ordinance. As a related matter, the applicant seeks to eliminate a condition in the 1973 variance that states the enclosed tennis courts are private, not commercial, since the condition potentially conflicts with the home occupation use in an R120 residential district at 24 Orchard Hill Road. Good evening. Yep, take your time. Please post whatever you'd like. And then if you could just introduce yourself, we'll be prepared to proceed. I will make note that I've also asked Town Council Jerry Riley to attend the meeting this evening to provide some advice and counsel in regard to this issue. Okay, thank you.
Good evening, Mr. Chairman and members of the Zoning Board of Appeals. My name is Geraldine Tortorella. I'm a partner in the law firm of Hockerman, Tortorella, and Weckstein in White Plains. We're counsel for the applicant, Lori Ensinger and William Kubler, who you noted have made this application this evening. With me is Lori Ensinger, and as I indicated, she with her husband own the property that we're going to be discussing this evening. Can the board see the aerial photograph that we have up on the board?
Sharon, can I just comment? There's something on the floor. I'm afraid if you step back, you are going to trip and fall.
A pen, thank you.
Okay, you're welcome.
I believe that was attached to the packet that you had provided.
Yeah.
And is marked as Section A.
That is correct, Mr. Chairman. We have a nice glossy version of it
Okay.
that's up here on the board, just for the benefit of people in the audience as well as the board members. I just want to orient you a little bit to the property. This is the property outlined in red is the property that's the subject of the application this evening. On this property, there is a building that we will refer to as the tennis barn or the tennis building. And within this building, there are two full-size tennis courts, which are in this photograph that I'm pointing to here. I have handed up to the board an extra set of the photographs so you can look at them yourselves there. But this is the two tennis courts that are within the tennis court building on the property. You'll hear a little bit later about what the blue refers to when Ms. Ensinger gives you some explanation with respect to some of the history of the property. But the red is the property that's the subject of this application this evening. This tennis court was constructed in 1973 after a prior zoning board of appeals issued a height variance for the structure. The structure was over what the permitted height was for an accessory structure in the district, and so a height variance was required. And at the time, the Zoning Board of Appeals attached two conditions to that height variance, not having really anything to do with the height. One was that it was for tennis purposes only, and then the other is that it's for private and not commercial. The building is to be used that way. And we'll talk about that second condition a little bit later this evening in our presentation. So it appears to be fairly widely known by people who have been in the town for a very long time that this tennis court building, from the time that it was erected, was actually used by the owner who built it for providing lessons and play by third parties. And it has historically continued in that vein since the time that it was originally constructed, notwithstanding what some people might think the conditions that I just mentioned happen to require or provide for. So Ms. Ensinger and Mr. Kubler purchased the property around 2005, and at that time they continued the use, much consistent with the way that it had been used historically. So third parties will train there and practice and play in these two tennis courts. And as you can see, these two tennis courts, I mean, these are not, you know, small tennis courts. I mean, these are real tennis courts. They're full size. They're clay tennis courts. They are the type of facility that would be constructed and one would use for not just their own personal use, but for actually and use by third parties if you're going to train, which you'll hear a little bit more about why we believe that's what the intention was when that variance was granted back in 1973. So unfortunately, the property has to be sold for health reasons, and Ms. Ensinger and Mr. Kubler have found a purchaser, a prospective purchaser, who is a tennis pro, who is born in Westchester County, wants to live in Westchester County, wants to continue the use much like it had originally been approved, to provide private instruction and for play and practice by third parties. And so that prospective purchaser really wants to have, you know, a clear path and understanding that that use, which has happened historically, is a use that he can continue to make of the tennis court building. Now, the person will reside on the property. It'll be his principal residence, much like it has been historically by everybody who's utilized this tennis structure. We believe that the nature of the use, it's limited in scope. It's by invitation only. It's a selective grouping of people who are able to utilize the building. We believe that that use would qualify under your definition of home occupation in the zoning ordinance. And so we made a request to the Zoning Board of Appeals, to the building inspector, for a determination that it's a home occupation use. And Mr. Tuma made a determination in June and determined that he didn't believe that the tennis courts would be allowed to be used as a home occupation because they were not, quote, an office or studio by definition. That was the basis for the determination, and we provided you with a copy of that determination in our submission. So we're here this evening, having taken an appeal from that determination. We respectfully think that that is an erroneous determination, and we think we can meet the criteria and the requirements for home occupation based on the nature of the use and the fact that it's the way that it's contained and it's limited on the site. We are seeking from your board a reversal of the determination by the building inspector. We're asking the board to determine that that limited use of, as we've described, by a resident tennis professional to provide instruction and to have practice and play in this structure on an invitation-only basis, very limited, very selective basis, is a permitted home occupation use. We believe we meet the criteria and the elements that are required for it to be a teacher, for it to be incidental, an incidental use, and all of the other requirements for home occupation. And I'll talk a little bit about those legal requirements a little bit later. The second prong of our application is to have an amendment of the 1973 variance so that we can eliminate what I think may create an ambiguity in whether the condition private and not commercial means, conflicts with someone operating this in a way that they would make a profit, like anybody who's undertaking a home occupation would have a profit in their business. That's the whole point of undertaking the home occupation. It's not just a hobby. I mean, it's an idea that you would actually run a business, but in a very limited fashion from your home. So that's the second prong of the application that we want to make this evening. I just want to orient you a little bit. I mean, we're not seeking a variance, an area variance from the board, but I think understanding the context will be helpful as you hear more facts about what's happened historically. So this is Orchard Hill Road, which is a town road. This is the property, as I already indicated, is outlined in red. There's an entrance driveway. It's really a road that comes in, and it's a private road that comes in along this section onto the property and then follows where I'm indicating, leads to the tennis barn, and then also to the main residence and some other accessory structures that are on the property. The parcel is over 18 acres in size, so it's a very substantial piece of property. This adjoining piece here is also owned by our clients, but it's not part of this application. It's the piece that's just below or to the west of the piece outlined in red. And I've already indicated to you where the barn is. I'd like to take a few minutes and have Ms. Enzinger come up and just explain to you historically what has happened with this structure, how she and her husband have used it, and some other elements about the property. And then I'd like to turn to our legal reasons why we believe our application should be granted.
Sure.
Good evening, Mr. Chairman and zoning board members. My name is Lori Ensinger. My husband could not be here tonight. We are the owners, as Jerry said, of 24 Orchard Hill Road. I just want to state for the record, we did not build the building, nor were we the applicant for the 1973 variance. So we've only been on the property since 2005. The building is about 100 by 120, and it received the required permits from the town to be constructed in its current location and in its current size. The owners began teaching tennis at the time on a very controlled basis upon construction of the building and continued to do so for the next 13 years that they owned it. The property changed hands several times over the next 20 years, and the subsequent owners continued to permit tennis professionals to teach there and local players to play on a limited basis inside the building. We purchased the property in 2005, and after discussions with the town, or prior to purchasing, as part of our due diligence, as a result of discussions with the town, we continued to use the courts in the same way. The income from the doing so helps to defray the high maintenance costs and the property taxes on that particular building. The largest cohort of people who play are from Somers, including neighbors, and most typically Heritage Hills folks. Before we purchased the property, we asked the town if the building was allowed for tennis play. We were living down county at the time. We were told that the town was fully aware that it had been used since the early 1970s for locals to play, and although the property was residentially zoned, it was not considered a problem. The town had never had any objections or enforcement actions against it, and we were told that it could be used for family, friends, and by invitation. So we went ahead and consummated the acquisition. The existence of the building is not the issue tonight. It is what it is, it's fully permitted, and it came with the property. However, from day one, we've been very sensitive to making sure the building fits in as much as possible from an aesthetic and unobtrusive perspective as we could get it. When we bought the property, the building was an unsightly mess. It was your pretty traditional metal butler building. And we soon invested sizable sums in improvements inside and out, including being responsive to the neighbor to the north who was upset about the roof being rusted, and it was. So we responded by putting on a whole new roof and a new exterior, and the exterior is stone and hardy siding. So this is the exterior of the building, and it's a neutral gray with stone and barn doors. We were trying to convert it from looking like a metal building to looking more like an equestrian structure. In addition, we added dozens of evergreen trees. You have actual photographs in your package from the application that show the screening on all three sides. And on the north side, right here, the border with Mr. Conti's property, we offered the previous homeowner to plant screening trees on their property because of topography. We couldn't get them on ours. You can see it's very close to that property. That offer still stands. This house, by the way, is 400 feet away through the woods, but we would still offer to plant evergreen trees here if Mr. Conti would like to. I'd also like to give some further context, and Jerry started to allude to that. The property is 18 acres in size. The other structures that existed on the property when the building was built in 1973 are the same ones that are there now. The main residence and 2 accessory rental cottages that are legal rentals. They're both rented out to single women. The property is adjacent to one of the town's greatest assets, the Anglefly Preserve. This is Anglefly, as you all know. It's 650 acres of preserve land. At the time we purchased it, our property was being looked at by several developers for a residential subdivision. As longtime conservationists, my husband and I purchased the property knowing that we wanted to preserve the land. And in 2006, we donated a conservation easement to the Westchester Land Trust on the entire property at a significant cost to ourselves. The easement forever extinguished the right to subdivide or further build on the property, and it preserves the natural state of the undeveloped land, which, as you can see, is mostly woods, meadow, and more woods. This easement ensures a permanent natural buffer that benefits the surrounding properties forever. It runs with the land to all future owners. So why is this relevant tonight? The conservation easement, which is a matter of public record, and I have a copy in case you can't sleep tonight and would like to read it, runs with the land in perpetuity to all future owners of our property. It places strict limits on the expansion of any of the buildings. For the tennis building, the easement allows a maximum footprint of 13,000 square feet, and the building today is at 12,600 square feet, so there is effectively no practicable room to expand it. The only additional structures allowed by the easement are non-habitable structures ancillary to residential use, for example, a barn, a tool shed, or a pool house. And they can only be located in building envelope 1. So this blue line is building envelope 1. It encompasses basically all the major buildings on the property with the exception of the little rental cottage that's at the back. So building envelope 1 has strict limitations in addition to the tennis building of coverage on the ground of 4,700 square feet. We are at 4,700 square feet, so building 1 can never be built on again in perpetuity. Building envelope 2 has a 1,900 square foot coverage limitation, and this building is 1,700 square feet. So 200 square feet, you could maybe put on a sun porch or something, but not much more. The easement prohibits signage at the road or on the property, anywhere on the property, except for house numbers or names for 911 emergency identification. And you can see photos of the signage. Here is the signage at the road. This was the sign that was there when we bought it. The property was called Oldfield. We had a new sign made when the old one deteriorated. And we worked with the building inspector at the time to understand the best way to get emergency 911 numbers in a visible way on the property. This sign is located right at the intersection where these driveways peel off to each of the homes. So you can see it blends in nicely, unobtrusive, black gate at the entrance. This is the entrance from Orchard Hill Road, the view in. You cannot see the building. The building is 2/10 of a mile away into the property. The property is very large. Just for context, this is almost a half a mile from front to back. Okay, so this house here is a half a mile away from here, and you can see the scale here, 800 feet. This is about 1,000 feet away. This is 400 feet away, 600 feet away, about 600 feet away. So it's a very large property. The tennis building, as I said, is 2/10 of a mile in from Orchard Hill Road. It has no exterior lights other than a standard residential lighting outside the doors. It is fully enclosed and it emits no noises. There are no amenities akin to what a commercial facility would have, and there never could be. The parking area configuration that was there when we bought the property has not changed, and we worked with the building inspector at the time to make sure we understood what the requirements were for emergency vehicle ingress and egress and turnaround. We've created full screening, as I mentioned, with 25-foot evergreen trees so that all of the parking area and most of the building is now screened from view. You can see this on the aerial. So this actually is an old aerial from '05, but this side is now fully 25-foot Norway spruces, 25-foot arborvitaes, 25-foot Norway spruces, and this is the remaining section that we're offering to screen. There are 3 rows of trees screening this property, 1, 2, and 3. In sum, the building cannot be used any more intensively than it has been for the past 46 years because there is no physical way to expand it. Use of the court for teaching or practice and training has always been on an invitation-only basis and would continue to be used that way. The tennis courts have never been public. It's never been a drop-in or drive-by tennis facility. There is no signage, nor would there be so under any prospective purchaser's use. Remember that this is our home, and we want to limit its use just as the prospective purchaser wants to. I personally interview any new inquiry that we get who wants to make a reservation to teach or play, and I have said no to as many people as I've said yes to. In terms of the intensity of the existing use of the courts, at the peak during our 14 years, we've had a maximum of 10 reservations a day. So there are 2 courts. A reservation is people playing on one of the courts. The bulk of the play occurs between September and May. We consider reservation requests spread out across a day that is typically, or could be 7 a.m. to about 9:30 p.m. Depending upon the day of the week, the building is never fully occupied and is often empty. The number of cars per reservation ranges from between 1 to 4. We ask people to carpool, and people try to do so as much as possible. I would say the average is 2 to 3 cars per reservation. So at its peak, there were probably 20 to 30 cars spread out over the course of a 15-hour window on a maximum day, and most days were nowhere near that. Before we purchased the property, it was laid out for 4 to 5 lot residential subdivision, and what we have occurring there and what the prospective purchaser would do as his home occupation isn't out of scale with residential use for that configuration of a subdivision. I want to reiterate what Jerry said. We are only looking for a path for a tennis professional to use the existing tennis building for home occupation on a controlled basis in the same way it's been used since 1973. We're not requesting a zoning change to make the property commercial, nor to make this a tennis mill or a public tennis clinic. We are not requesting any expansion to the structure, any new structures, or any changes to the private road configuration or size, or to the parking configuration or size, all of which have been in their current state for decades and functioned without issue. Other than the prior neighbor that I mentioned who was concerned about the rusted roof, which we replaced, we have received no neighbor complaints in 14 years. This property has meant a lot to us, and we would not be selling it if it weren't for a declining health situation. We'd like to sell it to someone who can be a good steward of the property, who has the ability to maintain it, and who, like us, wants to use the tennis barn in a selective, controlled manner that meshes with the residential use of the property and the surroundings. We believe the prospective purchaser is that person. As Jerry mentioned, he was born and raised in Westchester. He's looking to move back here from New York City to raise a family. He told me that he's known about our property for a couple of decades and has always dreamed of owning the property and teaching there. The property will become his primary residence, and he wishes to become self-employed at his new home. He has no interest in a commercial scale facility. If he did, he could have purchased one of several, and he chose not to. His focus will be on limiting the number of people that use the building. He has said his motto is a few whales rather than 1,000 minnows. I've come to know him over the past few months, and I really do believe that he will become a wonderful and very involved resident who gives back generously to the Somers community. Thank you.
So turning to the legal issues that are before you this evening, the first is the question of whether or not this use would qualify and meet the definition of home occupation that's in your zoning ordinance. And we provided you with a written submission dated June 14, 2019. In that, on page 3, we do have the definition from section 170-3 of the zoning ordinance. And home occupation is defined as any use customarily conducted in the office or studio of a physician, surgeon, doctor, chiropractor, dentist, lawyer, accountant, engineer, architect, artists, musician, teacher, or agricultural specialist, or other occupation normally conducted from such residence by a person residing on the premises and incidental to such residence. And then it goes on to say that you cannot have a clinic or a hospital or a barber shop, a beauty parlor, tea room, tourist home, or a variety of other types of uses in clinics which are not at issue in what we're proposing to you this evening. So if you take the definition apart, you have to look at the various terms. Your code doesn't define many of the terms that are in the zoning ordinance definition of home occupation. But if you look at teacher, which we think this is, this particular tennis professional would be, applying rules of construction when the definition is not contained in the zoning ordinance, you have to look to how the term is generally understood. And if there's ambiguity or confusion, that ambiguity and confusion has to be construed in favor of the property owner. Because there's no definition of teacher, we turn to Merriam-Webster dictionary, and teacher is defined as one that teaches, especially one whose occupation is to instruct. Teach is defined as, among other things, to cause to know something, to cause to know how, to instruct by precept, example, or experience, and to provide instruction, act as a teacher. Now in this instance, the tennis professional who wants to buy this house and this property and wants to be able to conduct a home occupation on the tennis courts is clearly one who's giving instruction in tennis, imparting knowledge, training. I think it clearly meets the definition of teacher under the general understanding of what teacher means, since there is no contrary definition in your zoning ordinance. Another requirement is that the use be incidental to the principal residential use. Now, tennis courts are deemed to be permitted accessory structures and uses under your zoning ordinance on residential properties. So by definition, having been categorized as acceptable accessory uses, tennis courts are considered to be incidental to a residential use. But when we look at this particular tennis court, we also have incidentality demonstrated by the relationship of the buildings on the property, by access, and by a number of other different physical features. For example, we've got one site, it's all one property, access is from the same road. We have a relationship from the driveway that comes in and branches off to the other structures that are on the property. It's a very minimalistic building. It has, as Lori indicated, it has no significant utility services. There are no bathrooms, there are no sinks. There's a water spigot, but no sewage disposal services. There is electricity because it's needed for lights and things of that nature, but it's always done on a very minimalistic basis. If you see the interior, I mean, we have a partial shot here, but the interior indicates that it's not a fancy structure, and it really doesn't lend itself to be a type of facility that someone would call a club or would want to join on a club basis. It has its use historically has been accessory and incidental to the principal residential use. We've seen that from the description of the use. It is controlled, use is controlled by the owner, would continue to be controlled by the owner. It's on an invitation-only basis. The owner decides who, when, and under what circumstances people are allowed to utilize the facility. So in that manner as well, it's also incidental to the principal residential use. There are a few other requirements for the use itself, for home occupation use, many of which would not be relevant here. For example, there's a talk about appliances that can be used and things of that nature, but there are no appliances that are used in this facility except possibly tennis balls and tennis rackets and the kinds of uses that are customarily found on a residential property where you find tennis courts. So there's nothing special about the nature of the equipment for this particular use. So in that vein as well, it is consistent with being incidental. And we've already talked about signage. You know, a home occupation cannot really have signage. There will be none here. No signage is allowed under the conservation easement. So that is not an issue or a matter of concern. And we've given you photographs of the full extent of the signage that you actually would see on the property. The fact that the home occupation would occur in a separate structure is not a matter of concern. There is nothing in your code that requires the home occupation to be in the principal or main residence. In fact, there's a contemplation by referring to an office or studio that it could be in a separate accessory structure. So that is not a matter of concern. If it is in a principal residence, there is a requirement that there be a limitation on the square footage in relationship to the principal residence. But because this use would not be in the principal residence, we believe that that criterion isn't applicable here. So the only ground that the building inspector determined that it would not qualify, that tennis courts would not qualify for use for home occupation, is that it's not an office or studio by definition. Now, there is no definition of office or studio in your zoning ordinance. So again, we're relegated to look at the common meaning or understanding of those terms by reference to other sources. I mean, an office, again, turning to Merriam-Webster, an office is defined as a place where a particular kind of business is transacted or service is supplied, such as the place in which a professional person conducts business. I mean, to say that a tennis professional conducts his business on tennis courts, to me seems obvious. I don't know how you could qualify that tennis courts not being the place where a tennis professional or teacher would conduct his or her business. And so that in that vein, I think it meets the definition of office pretty easily. Studio is subjected to a number of different definitions that we found. I mean, in some instances, it's related to the arts, to painters and sculptors and photographers. Other definitions we found are very much broader and says that it's just a studio is defined as a separate structure accessory to a residence to be used for a purpose accessory to the main residential use. Well, if you applied that definition we clearly qualify as this building being a studio under that definition again. Now, being that there is no definition in the code, you need to look at the general understanding, and any questionability of it needs to be construed in favor of the applicant. So based on all of those factors, we believe we meet each of the criteria or requirements for this use to be a home occupation use. Turning to the second prong of our application, you know, that condition that I mentioned earlier that says private and not commercial, we think creates confusion and potentially some ambiguity. And we are applying to have it removed so that the home occupation use could be undertaken on the property. And we think that the rationale for doing that is that it would clear up potential ambiguity. We cited a line of cases that have indicated that your board has the jurisdiction and ability to amend variances to change and eliminate conditions. We've cited a few cases where that's actually been done by courts that have this area within its jurisdiction and elsewhere in New York State. The standard of review is it rational to do it? We think it is rational in order to clear up that ambiguity. I mean, some could argue or construe that condition to mean that if you are not using it for personal use, but third-party use, and if you receive any remuneration for the use, then it is not private and it is commercial, and that's where the ambiguity or the rub is created. We don't think private and not commercial meant that. I mean, it doesn't, from all the facts that we know, it doesn't make sense to construe that condition that way, because if you look at the substantial nature of what was constructed, I mean, why would somebody need to construct 2 significant tennis courts in order to have it for personal play? You know, we think personal and private are distinguishable. They're not the same term. They're not the same standard. And historically, since 1973, we believe the town's knowledge and assent, the facility has been used by third parties, and it has been used for, you know, remuneration. There has been an exchange of consideration in order for the use to occur. So we think both the facts historically as to what has happened and just the physical characteristics of the property indicate to us that it's more likely than not, or the facts support more so than not, a construction that private didn't mean personal. But again, it creates confusion, and we're seeking to have it amended to be removed from the variance for the sole and limited purpose of the home occupation use. We're not looking to do that so that this can be turned into a tennis club. That isn't the intention, that isn't the objective, and we think that we have defined how it's been used historically, and we're looking for that to be able to continue that way. Those are the legal reasons we think. We also think, I mean, I personally question whether or not, if I had been around in 1973 and been an attorney in 1973 and was asked the question, I think I probably could have made a very good case for those conditions not being legal in connection with the variance that was granted. And again, that was not a use variance. That was a height variance for a structure. And I think that, and we've briefed it and explained it in our submission, I don't think there's a nexus between the potential impacts from the height of a structure and the impacts from the indoor use of tennis courts, whether you get money for it or you don't get money for it, if it's on a limited basis. So we're happy to answer any questions you have.
I did have a couple of questions or a couple of items that I'd like to discuss with you. Under 170-11, Section 6, it talks about the customary incidental home occupations conducted solely by persons residing on the premises, provided that, and then it lists 4 items. Now, one of the items it lists that not more than 1/2 of the area of 1 floor of the dwelling unit is so used. Okay, so it limits home occupations to 1/2 of the area of the floor of the dwelling unit is so used. Now, the next thing I looked up in the code is, what is the definition of a dwelling unit? Dwelling unit, a building or portion thereof providing complete housekeeping facilities for a family. So the issue I have here is that this is a separate structure. I don't see how it's a dwelling unit. And how do you get over the hurdle of, the code seems to indicate that the home occupation has to be within the dwelling unit. I'm not sure I see this, how I see the structure as the dwelling unit, because the family doesn't reside there.
So, and I did address that earlier. I don't read that requirement in 6B, little b, as in boy, to mean that the use must occur in the dwelling. I read that to say that if it occurs in the dwelling, it must be, and meet that requirement that it cannot be larger than 1/2 of the area of 1 floor of the dwelling unit so used. And the reason I say that is because if you go back to the definition of home occupation, right, it refers back to an office or a studio. Now, under other standards or rules of interpretation that are applicable to zoning ordinances and other statutes, I mean, you have to give all of the pieces of the statute meaning. So there would be no reason to call out office or studio if the requirement was that the facility, the use, the home occupation, had to be in the principal residential dwelling.
I mean, when I think of an office or studio, you know, I think of what the code indicates here as a home occupation. I think of the lawyer working out of his home, or a doctor, and it's limited to one person in their home. Someone, an attorney or an accountant, might meet someone in their home. I don't know, a 12,600 square foot separate structure on the property, I think it's a stretch to say it's a home occupation.
But solely because you think because it's in a separate structure? That's what I hear you saying.
Well, I think that because the code says here, provided that not more than 1/2 of the area of 1 floor of the dwelling unit is so used. So this is not in the dwelling unit in my mind. But I'm willing to listen to what you have to say about that. But that's a hurdle I'm trying to get over, and I'm not sure I see it.
See, to me, if the requirement was going to be so basic that it had to be in the dwelling unit, then like you find in other codes, it would say that the home occupation use must be located in a dwelling or in the principal dwelling. It doesn't say that. What it says is, among the criteria for the home occupation is not more of 1/2 of the 1 floor, area of 1 floor of the dwelling unit so used can be devoted to the home occupation. I don't think that's to the exclusion of it being elsewhere. And let me give you an example.
But it also doesn't say that the home business can be outside of the dwelling unit or in a separate structure.
No, but under rules of construction that control, if there's ambiguity, it has to be construed in our favor. It has to be construed in favor of the property owner and against the municipality if there's a lack of clarity.
Ms. Tortorella, I take umbrage with that statement. You've repeated it 3 or 4 times. I think what you're dealing with, you have to start with the idea that if the determination of the building inspector is not unreasonable in interpreting this code, it is to be deferred to by this board and by courts. Getting into the idea of whether what has to be in the property deferred to the property owner, you don't get that far, in my opinion, in this. And if you look at the home occupation definition in I don't know what the code is, 170-3. They're talking about customary offices and things done customarily in an office studio, and they talk about residence. Exactly what the chairman is talking about, and I just think you're going off the point here when you're coming up with like hypotheticals and get to the point of saying, in my opinion, what is unreasonable about what Mr. Tuma stated. And, you know, to go this historical thing about what somebody said, he said, she said, it's another area in which I feel you're deflecting the proper discussion before this board. What is done historically is almost like you're saying it's a pre-existing non-conforming use. And to me, that's what you would have to establish. And by historically stating that a use was made of a structure probably contrary to a 1973 variance, which no one ever challenged. And there's no way you can challenge, in my opinion, those two words, which rather than being ambiguous, are the two clearest words I've ever seen in a condition. And challenging that, it's too late. And maybe you would have challenged it in 1973, but I think what the chairman is getting at is to look at what Mr. Tuma did say with reference to not just his section, but the definition itself, which refers to customary, and it's Mr. Tuma's determination of what is customary, and if it's not unreasonable, all of these other arguments, with all due respect, seem to be something that is trying to get the board to go to a place which it shouldn't be going. That's my issue with what you're saying.
Yeah,
I mean, one thing I want to say also here, when I do look at the 1973 variance, it very specifically says private and not commercial. Commercial, in my mind, is receiving funds for services of some sort or selling something. Clearly, providing tennis lessons for a fee would be a commercial use. And, you know, as far as the variance goes, I mean, I can't specifically say what was in the mind at that time of when this was passed, but I would assume what the board did at that time was saying, okay, you want a height variance for this structure, okay, we're going to give you the height variance, but these are the conditions we're put on it. And now it almost seems like you want to go back and change those, and I don't know, that was the condition that was on it. As far as the use of the property over the years where lessons have been given, just because lessons were given, I don't see how the code provides or allows them to be given. I think just because maybe they were given in violation doesn't then automatically say, well, we can continue that. Now, maybe it was done very innocuously and none of the neighbors complained and there weren't any issues. You know, and I don't know if the town can regulate who comes on and off a property and if a fee is paid for something. But I don't think that in and of itself then says, okay, you know, you have a commercial use. Remember, this is a residential neighborhood. And I'm just concerned that in a residential neighborhood, you know, if we were to grant such a definition of home use, what's to prevent a plumber from storing all his supplies and materials and operating a plumbing business from this location, or an electrician, or a contractor? I don't know where it would end, quite honestly. I just don't see this as a normal professional office or studio use. I mean, I'm just one opinion of 5 here, but you know, that's the problem I'm having at looking at this application.
So if I could just address a few of those things.
Sure.
I disagree with you, Mr. Riley. I think that on an appeal, this board has a right to look at Mr. Tuma's determination and to reach a different conclusion, and it's not limited by the basis to say, is it unreasonable? I mean, that's not the criteria. I mean, the board is asked to interpret the code when there's an appeal from the zoning, from the building inspector. I look at the definition and I see agricultural specialist. Now, what agricultural specialist do we know sits in an office or a studio? Agricultural or agriculturalists, where do they work? They work in greenhouses. So if you're in a greenhouse, does that mean that you can't have the home occupation use? Teachers don't teach in offices. Teachers don't teach in studios. Teachers teach in classrooms. But under your interpretation, you would have to have a situation where a teacher would have to be teaching in an office. I mean, it's not, doesn't make any sense. That isn't where teachers teach.
Yeah, I mean, what if we approve this use, and let's talk about the teaching aspect. What's to prevent the new owner of the property from having 30 young tennis players come on the property and have a clinic there. I mean, because once we approve the home office use, I don't know then how it would be regulated. I mean, you could have 30, because I mean, you're looking at a structure that's 12,600 square feet. That's a big structure. I mean, you could fit a lot of people in there.
It is. It is a big structure, and we're not here seeking a variance for the structure. I mean, the structure was allowed to be built in
That's not the issue
1973.
before us.
Right.
It's how it's to be used.
So what's to limit having 30 people? First of all, I don't know how you would fit 30 people, okay? I think we've described what the use is. I think that there is a line over which one would have an appreciation for the level of use or the intensity of use getting beyond home occupation and more into commercial. I mean, we've told you how it's used. We've told you the nature of the reservations. We've told you what the limits are. This prospective purchaser is prepared to abide by those limitations. How do you enforce any conditions of an approval?
You're making this personal to an individual who may be the most wonderful person in the world, but you know with the zoning we're dealing with a variance, an interpretation of a variance. Whoever the person is irrelevant. Whatever the board decides would be running with the land. So the idea of holding this to one person who may be a sainted tennis professional is irrelevant.
But you're misunderstanding my point. My point is, and I'm not suggesting that you do it just because this is a good guy, all right? That's not my point. My point is that there is a way to craft and formulate criteria, conditions of a variance, and I'm sure you've done it before, you've imposed conditions, which would put the parameters on the use to keep it to that intensity where it still operates. I'm sorry, on the interpretation. You're correct. You're correct.
If they're asked just to interpret Mr. Toomer's opinion.
You're correct. I stand corrected. I misspoke. Well, I think that interpretation could have conditions limited on it. You don't?
No.
Wouldn't it require a use variance, Jerry?
Yes. To me, in order to get this, and I regret it, you either need change of use or use variance.
I mean, that's what I'm coming down to.
The difference between private and commercial is so apparent to me that you would be requesting this board to give you a use variance where the prior board gave an area variance and allowed them to build it higher in order that they could have these tennis courts, and said to them, just as the chairman said, it seems to me in 1973, private. Now, again, the chairman, the fact that this has been used for monetary remuneration is irrelevant. Now you're asking this board to approve that. In other words, to approve a commercial use of a piece of property in a residential area. Because maybe it was done before, who the people are, and Ms. Carter, you know better than I do that is contrary to what a zoning board determines.
Yeah, I mean, the way I look at this is I do see this as almost like you're asking for a change in use. And as we all know,
Change in zoning.
A use variance here. Yeah, and a use variance is, an extremely high hurdle to cross.
But can I ask a question? So here's where I struggle with that analysis, right? I hope we all agree that a home occupation is a use that someone would engage in to make money. I mean, is that a fair statement? I mean, it's not a hobby. It's running a business.
A commercial
and you're allowed
activity.
and you're allowed to do it in your home, right? Meeting certain criteria. So, yes, one is allowed to operate a home occupation on their residential property. I don't think there's any question about that in the code.
That is, I would counsel the board that is absolutely correct. But
Bingo.
The issue I want you to get is the difference between
I will.
a profession and a skill. What is the difference if a carpenter comes in and says he's a professional carpenter and he's going to give carpentry lessons? Is that what they're talking about? Or do we have a history that you're aware of, as like I am, that goes back into the 1940s, that when they talk about home occupation, they're talking about professions in which the teacher is gone to school, formal schooling, is accredited, belongs to an association that's sort of governed them. That's what the Court of Appeals has spoken about in a myriad of different issues on professionalism. And my dilemma is that this teacher, tennis pro, is a skilled person, and God bless him that he is, but that is not what a home occupation, which is why I think that's where Mr. Tuma comes down and says, yes, this is what it usually is, this is what the definition says, and just this man, or any man who would be a field goal kicking teacher, I mean, what would stop you from that? See, this is the dilemma that I would suggest to the board, that the precedent of allowing this, I don't see how they could formulate the way you did. And it's a wonderful way you crafted it, but how can a board concoct this situation just to fit this one piece of property in the town of Somer? That's my dilemma.
So let me address some of that, because what I hear you saying is that to have a home occupation, you need to be a licensed professional. And that clearly is not required by this definition.
No, but that is the custom, when they're talking about the customary ones, that's what it is.
But
and you're not listening to what I have as a dilemma, which is to advise the board that this man is a professional as opposed to a skilled individual. And that is what is traditionally talked about in home occupations. All the cases, I read all the cases you had, and I don't see one that allows a teacher who is not a teacher, you know, a teacher with all the certificates in the home occupation. And I looked carefully, and maybe but you didn't have any in your paper.
no, I didn't, because unfortunately, I'm constrained by sticking to the terms of the ordinance.
No.
Okay? And turning to the terms of the ordinance, it doesn't say that the person has to be professional. And it has, among the list of permitted home occupations is agricultural specialist. I don't even know what that is, okay? But I have never seen a degree, a licensing degree for an agricultural specialist. And it says, or other occupation, not or other profession, but or other occupation. Now, I grant you, maybe this does, and I don't know the terminology and the definitions in the cases that you read, so I can't comment on them. But that is important to understand what those terms were. This is not your typical home occupation provision in an ordinance. I will grant you that. There is nothing in here that says that it has to be, the person engaging in the home occupation has to be a professional, a licensed professional. It doesn't. I mean, a dancer is not necessarily a licensed professional. A musician is not a licensed professional. A musician is treated differently from teacher.
A learned profession in which the person who purports to be a professional in a home occupation is someone who has been to school and you know, it's like the chairman started off with doctor, lawyer, you know, accountant, and those type of persons. It's not limited, but customarily, which when we get back to whether the determination of Mr. Tuma is reasonable.
Yeah, but you have to read the rest of the definition. I mean, it's not just customarily in what the Court of Appeals might say. It's customarily, and then you look at the enumeration and list of different occupations that are listed there. I don't know of a licensing of artists or musicians or agricultural specialists or other occupations. I mean, it would be very easy to say profession. It doesn't say profession, it says occupation.
That's correct.
And that's a much broader term.
Here's my dilemma. It does say or other occupation, but it then expands other occupation normally conducted from such residence. And that's the limitation on other occupation. Putting that aside, even if we accept teacher as someone who is not accredited without a teaching degree, if we were to expand teacher to tennis professional, where do we draw the line from someone who is a lifeguard, who can swim, who has a pool, who then can be giving swim lessons out of their home as a home occupation? And that can be throughout the town, that we have swimming clinics. And that's not the path I think this board wants to take.
I mean, when I see a professional use out of someone's home, okay, they might take a bedroom or a living room or whatever, and maybe meet a client or two or do something like that. I see that very different from every residence in a particular neighborhood building a 12,000 square foot structure and then claiming, okay, I'm operating this or that business out of it. I see that as being very different and not in line with the code's intent. I think the code's intent is very clear when it talks about not more than half the area of one floor of the dwelling unit. As Melissa mentioned, normally conducted from such residence, and the definition of a dwelling unit being a building or portion thereof providing complete housekeeping facilities for a family. I think when they wanted, my looking at the code kind of indicates that, you know, when you have a home use, if it's in your dwelling unit, it's not going to be expansive. You know, it's not going to be huge. It's not going to be tremendous because it's contained within the home. You're living there, so you're not going to be having a huge business. You know, so I don't know. I look at this as different. You know, this is a separate structure. I don't know how you get past this outside the dwelling unit, and then the nature of it, and you know, what's to prevent anybody else in this neighborhood or any other neighborhood from using an accessory building and basically saying, well, we're doing teaching of this particular thing or that particular thing. I'm teaching welding. I'm teaching carpentry. I'm teaching plumbing. I'm teaching electricians. You know, are we changing the character of the neighborhood? This is a residential neighborhood, and I think that has to really be carefully looked at in regard to this.
That comment, though, says to me that the concern isn't the actual activity, but it's the intensity of the use. That's what that says to me.
No, it's
because
not
why is it? Why? I mean, if you have a garage and you have a room above the garage and it's a detached garage, do you really think that you can't put your law office in that room above the garage?
Might not be able to. It's not in the family's dwelling unit.
I mean, I'd be curious to see whether that has ever been allowed in this town. I mean, I would be surprised if we would have a situation where someone wouldn't be allowed to do that. I mean, you have accessory apartments.
Yeah, as far as I know, this board has never. Accessory apartment is a special exception.
Yep.
Use permit, that's a whole different issue. But in my 15+ year tenure on the board, I've never seen a home office use in an accessory structure that I can recall. Maybe it exists, but I haven't seen it. I don't recall the board ever approving such. But
Going back to the point about how do you impose those conditions and those limitations, I think that they get imposed if the board were to amend the variance and eliminate or modify that condition. I think that that's the vehicle by which one could impose those limitations.
Aren't you going by the one area which you have a right to do, which is, not that you can do it, but to have a zoning change? And have you're asking them to draft a law especially for this property. And what you need is a zone change, I would think, to pull this off. And that's my opinion, that I would, you know, that's what you would need. Change the zone, given all these factors that the Esslingers have gone through over the years, and not put it on this board to give you basically a use variance based upon an interpretation of this. That's what it seems like to me, that the bottom line is you want the use changed. And I think that's what some of the board members, I think 3 of them, have suggested.
But is it your view that it's a change of the use because we're seeking to amend the condition, or?
The condition, to me, you can't, first of all, that condition is there until we're all gone. It hasn't been challenged in, I don't know, 50 years, 40 years, and it says private, not commercial, which is very blatant in what it says. So in order to get a commercial use, which is, everybody agrees a home occupation is a commercial use. A doctor works in his house, whoever it is works in his house to make a living. And this tennis pro, and whoever would be there would have to be a tennis pro from the end of time, is to making his living giving lessons in this structure. And it's...
I mean, the variance, when granted, says, in accordance with the following conditions. Number 1, use. A, tennis purposes only. B, private and not commercial. That was the condition for the approval of the height variance in the building.
And it would occur to me that that condition would have been placed there due to the size and scope of the building. If someone were putting a simple tennis court in their backyard, I don't think anybody would, it would ring any alarm bells that this had a potential significant commercial use. So it's clear to me that that was put there because of the size and scope, which goes to what you were talking about only being able to use half the size of a dwelling. We're talking about a very large facility here, and which raised some concerns about a potential commercial use, which it's clear to me that's why that condition was placed.
But then what?
Yeah, I mean, it seems to me that somebody on the board said, wow, this is a big facility, this almost looks like a business, so we'll approve it, but let's be clear, it's private, not commercial.
And I'm sure that they were told at the time that there was no intention of a commercial use like teaching or renting court time.
Right.
See, I see a difference between personal use and private. That's a distinction that I see, which is what I'm saying to you, that I think that private doesn't necessarily mean only personal. But you look at the tennis only, so what's the point behind the tennis only?
That was the condition put on it.
Yeah, but if you think about it, what's the rationale and justification? If this application is denied, then we're basically left with a white elephant, that we've invested substantial amounts of money in reliance on discussions with the municipality. I mean, we can't, what do we do with it? Who needs two indoor tennis courts? I mean, it's counterintuitive that it would be approved.
When it was brought to the zoning board, someone told the zoning board that they needed 2 tennis courts and that they weren't going to use them for commercial use. So there was someone at one time that must have stated that they needed that.
I think the limitation tennis only is so that they can't change what's inside to be used for another purpose. And I think that's a reasonable condition. It was proposed as a tennis court. They wanted to ensure that it remained as a tennis court, that it wasn't going to be any sort of nuisance down the road in the future, given the large size of the structure.
But something of that size would qualify, I mean, for barn, for stable, right? I mean, that's a permitted use. It doesn't make sense to me why they would have put that limitation as well. I mean, that's.
But that doesn't change the variance.
If we're gonna board horses.
The fact that you're saying that they're irrational in their conclusions doesn't change the variance.
You're correct. I would need to get that condition lifted.
Right.
I would need to get that condition lifted, right? I mean, it makes that condition doesn't. I mean, if I can't put it to a logical use, right, as a home occupation, and I disagree. I think that we meet the definition and the criteria, and I think to the extent that there are ambiguities, I do think the rules of construction apply here. I really do. I think it's within your jurisdiction to look at it fully, and I'm not understanding, you know, if someone is teaching, I'm not understanding why it matters if it's welding or if it's tennis or if it's math or if it's sewing or something else. I mean, it's not the subject matter that is the issue. The issue has to do with the intensity, right? And we have suggested, I think, a vehicle by which you can control that intensity in your construction of what a permitted home occupation.
But I don't think that's the matter that we're
would be here.
Here to rule on intensity.
Well, I think that goes to the definition of home occupation.
And would you say that the leasing of court time would also be part of home occupation?
It is historically part of what's been done
I didn't
on the
ask if, I
property.
know it's what's been done there. Would you consider that part of a home occupation?
Well, if it's done for training and instruction, yes.
Well, but no,
I get-
instruction is one thing with a teacher, right? Apparently there's also been the leasing of court time. So I wouldn't necessarily put that under home occupation.
Well,
I just wondered if you would.
Yeah,
That's all.
I
Thank you.
I think what has been allowed kind of frames and defines what a permitted home occupation would be here. I don't think if it's done on a reasonable level, I don't think that would render it not a home occupation. But that is not the principal nature of how the use would be employed. And it's not, just back to, I'm not talking about making it personal just to the prospective purchaser. I mean, I'm talking about a vehicle by which you could render a decision in our favor and put enough controls on it by the amendment to the variance that it wouldn't have to, it's not a personal issue.
Jerry, do they have to take a variance and 46 years later to amend it? You didn't apply for a variance. There's no application for a variance. They can't go through the variance factors. You're asking them to make a silk purse out of a sow's ear, basically, which is to take this 46-year-old variance, which you may have challenged if you were a lawyer, but you weren't there. I wasn't even practicing then, and I'm older than you. But I don't, the reason I'm saying this is I don't want them to get into an area where it's not called for. Whether Mr. Toomer's decision is rational or not is the issue, if they can interpret the code that way. And they do have the right to interpret the code. It goes from the building inspector to the zoning board to the Supreme Court. But the fact that whether it's rational or not is his determination in the first instance, and it's their determination.
Yeah,
I mean, the applicant can come back for a variance and ask for one, and then the board would consider it, but I think we're just interpreting whether Mr. Toomer's decision was rational. Ma'am, I have to do it one at a time.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, you have to come up to the microphone so everybody can hear you. Thank you.
So the property is suitable for horse property. It's been marketed as a horse property in the past. If we wanted to, if there was a buyer, if there were a buyer who emerged who said, could I turn that into an equestrian barn to have horses, would I have to come back to this board for a change, an amendment to the 73? I'm not clear on what the process is.
I don't think I think you should deal with Ms. Tortorella on issues like that. It's not really for the board at this time. The board is here only, Ms. Enslinger, on whether his decision is correct. Not on, they cannot legislate or
Understood.
propose what they're supposed to be doing. Ms. Tortorella is in much better shape to do that.
Understood. Thank you.
But what I am struggling with, I mean, how do you distinguish the two cases that I cited, where there's been an amendment to a variance?
What they have determined in those cases, which I read, is that the mere increase in usage where there's been a variance does not require another one. This has nothing to do about increase in usage. This goes back to the nitty-gritty of what happened in 1973. Whether you can change a condition. They didn't change the conditions in those cases. What they did was say they didn't need another variance because it was only an increase in the volume. If those are the cases you referred to.
I'm sorry, but I mean, that's completely wrong. In the case of Jackson against the Zoning Board of Appeals of the City of Long Beach, it's cited on page 5 of our submission. That's a case where a variance was granted to allow an applicant who is a dentist to convert a 2-family home to a 1-family home with a dental office on the main level on the condition that the applicant resided in the premises, in the residence on a permanent basis. So 6 years go by, the use gets established, 6 years go by, and 6 years after the variance was granted, the applicant wanted to relocate to a larger home and to rent the 2nd floor for a residence. So the applicant's leaving, the condition can't be met anymore. He applies to the Zoning Board of Appeals to eliminate the residency condition, and that's granted. He applied for an amendment to the variance to eliminate a condition, and it was granted. And the second department, which is the appellate court that governs this area and has jurisdiction over this area, said that you didn't have to go back and apply for a new variance, and you didn't have to meet the criteria for a new variance. You just had to demonstrate a rational basis for it, for the request.
This is the difference between the condition being private or commercial, which is a totally different use of the property. That's the distinction. You're asking for a commercial use for this property, and which means that you're nullifying the original variance. So I see a totally different application. And then your other cases were for the, I'm sure you recollect, were for the increase in the volume of the use.
Yes, and it, again, it was a condition, and it was an application to amend the condition. So, okay,
What I would like to do is I'd like to get to the audience and hear some comments. And, you know, I'll certainly give you an opportunity to come back. But I'd just like to hear, you know, people who have come. I want to get some more input on this from the audience, neighbors, or whoever else is interested in regard to this.
very good.
Okay, and then I'll let you come back.
Thank you.
Thank you. Sir, would you like to speak first? Yes. Yes, if you could please give us your name and address or who you represent, that would be great.
My name is Arthur Morris, and I represent the Pastena family that's here.
Use the mic, please. Oh, yeah. Please speak into the mic.
I represent the Pastena family and some other families that are here. You have a large collection of people that are here that are interested in the outcome of this. My office is at 1325 Avenue of the Americas in New York City.
You had provided us some
I did.
information just recently regarding this issue.
Thank you, with the help of your able secretary. Thank you. You've actually stolen my thunder because you said, I did the research as Mr. Riley did his research, and you said all the things that I was going to say. So basically, what I wanted to do is that Mr. Riley mentioned some law as a question of interpretation. And I'm just going to read the law. When there's a zoning interpretation of its zoning ordinance is entitled to great deference and will not be overturned by the courts unless, as Mr. Riley said, unreasonable or irrational. And then they cite the cases Matter of Green, and that's 114 AD 3rd 788, Matter of Wilkins versus Northeast Zoning Board of Appeals, and that's 136 AD 3rd 816. Now this is long established law, is that what she's absolutely seeking is an interpretation, and in that interpretation she has to establish ambiguity, and she hasn't done that. It's very clear, it's said by Mr. Riley better than me, is that there is no ambiguity here. They've made the wrong application. And then actually, I was startled by Ms. Enstiger got up and asked for legal advice from Mr. Riley or from the board as to what to do next. It's apparent from what I've heard is that the chairman has expressed and the board has expressed certain views. Mr. Riley has expressed certain views. I don't wish to repeat them again. It's really not necessary, because the law is correct as I've researched it that Mr. Riley expressed, and that's what I wanted to read into the record. So I will not repeat because it's really not necessary.
Okay.
But thank you.
Thank you, sir. Does anybody else here wish to speak in regard to this application? Ma'am, please come up and just give us your name and address, please.
Maureen Devine, 10 Susan Drive. This application was submitted with a brilliant 7-page letter from the property owner's lawyer that contains mainly legalese and hearsay information. In the late 1970s, I served on the ZBA with the gentleman whose 1973 decision the applicant is asking the current ZBA members to put aside. Those men were longtime residents of Somers and most experienced, knowledgeable, and dedicated to Somers and its future. They knew what they were doing and didn't use a lot of words to do it. Therefore, I have concerns that eliminating their 1973 condition would violate the intent of the Somers Code that currently keeps business at a residentially zoned property. Excuse me, I get nervous. The buildings inspector interpretation of the code and the definition of home occupation, that any use customarily conducted in the office or studio of a teacher is to be done in the office or studio of the teacher. In my opinion, he is correct. No way could I think that 2 enclosed tennis courts could be construed as an office or studio. Furthermore, home occupation as defined in the Somers Code also reads that a person residing on the premises normally conducts such occupation from such residence. The home occupation is incidental to the residence, which is the principal use. The teacher must reside on the premises. One can't legally reside in an enclosed tennis court, which is an accessory use. That 1973 ZBA decision clearly disallowed using 2 tennis courts as a business. Keep in mind that this 7-page letter refers to several accessory buildings, of which 3 are habitable, which you've been shown. The principal single-family residence, a smaller single-family house located in the rear of the property, a small habitable cottage located adjacent to and ancillary to the tennis court, a children's play cottage with or without water or septic, a tool shed, 2 non-habitable enclosed tennis courts. Do the smaller house and cottage predate zoning, or do they have certificates or occupants or variance? I'm not quite clear on that. The 7-page letter also states that the unnamed purchaser wants these changes and intends to reside in the principal building as his primary residence, and intends to give tennis lessons and instructions to and allow practice by third parties on the tennis courts. No persons other than the regular occupants of the property will be employed in the purchaser's home occupation. All instruction and training would be provided solely by persons residing on the property. Where on the property are these instructors and trainers residing? There are 3 habitable buildings on the property. Is the purchaser or a resident employee to be the teacher, or both? Am I correct in understanding that no non-residents of the property will be employed in the home occupation? According to the applicant's research, play-by and instruction of third parties has been conducted on the tennis courts by residents of the property for decades, quote unquote, apparently with the knowledge of and without objection from town officials. One definition of apparently is, you use apparently to indicate that the information you are given is something that you have heard, but you are not certain that is true. Ms. Ensinger also states that she, the applicant, was specifically told by unnamed town officials that the town knew how the courts were being used and had no objection to the use. The letter goes on to say that these quote-unquote facts support a conclusion that commercial tennis instruction has been treated by the town as a use customarily incidental to the principal resident of the use. It's either apparent or it's a fact. The board needs to know who the town officials were, where and when this information was given to the applicant. Was it in an official town office or was it at some private meeting? And if official, why is it not in written form? In a January 3rd, 1974 Patent Trader article, the Somers building inspector said that Mr. Jensen, the contract vendee, assured him that the court would be used only by him and his personal guests. In 1973, the interest of the applicant was that of the contract vendee, Mr. Jensen, an amateur tennis performer. In this application, the interest of the applicant is that of the owner. Nowhere is the identification of the phantom purchaser. The submitted 7-page letter of the applicant's lawyer constantly refers to the purchaser. According to this letter, the phantom purchaser will be the responsible party. The board should be informed of the identity of this non-resident, non-taxpayer who will actually benefit from any positive determination of this board and who is promising all good things. Applicant seeks to eliminate a condition in a 1973 variance that states the 2 enclosed tennis courts are private, not commercial. Purchaser is seeking to confirm formally that he may use the tennis courts in the manner requested while he resides on the property. Such a change, eliminating that 1973 condition, of course, would allow all future purchasers of this property to use the enclosed tennis courts as a commercial business. I leave this ZBA with that thought. On a different subject, do the sidelines of the tennis building adhere to the zoning ordinance? I only ask because this application was originally listed on the May ZBA agenda, seeking an area variance on its distance from the property, but it was withdrawn and replaced by the current application. Thank you for your time and attention. I have copies for the board.
Thank you. Yeah, sir, why don't you come on up? Oh, sorry.
Up.
Yeah.
Well,
Yeah.
take
Well,
one person.
you're all going to be able to speak, so we'll do you right in a row. Sir, if you could just give us your name and address, please.
My name is Gerald Masuri. I live on 20 Orchard Hill Road, Katona, New York. I live in the house next door to Lori's property. We've been in that house about 34 years. Shortly after we moved in, there was a Mike and Mary Mulcahy that purchased that property. They were a lovely family, and Mike was either a sergeant or a lieutenant in the Suffolk County Police Department. We became very close friends and socialized together, and Mike wanted to develop the property, and he was going to sell some of the property to myself so we could have some money to do it, but it never came to fruition. Because of our relationship, Rita and I sort of tolerated the cars going in and out every evening, all evening long, or whatever it was there, and we just never made any complaints about it. Many years later, it was sold to a fellow by the name of Cliff and his wife, also a very nice couple of children, and Cliff worked in either White Plains or Greenwich. He was in the finance business, and he was very successful. And once again, because of our relationship, we tolerated the traffic once again. A few years later, it was sold to Lori and Bill, also a wonderful couple. We have been to their home many times. We've had beers together and socialized together. Lori was a Wall Streeter and had a very big position there. Bill also worked. Once again, because of our relationship, Rita and I tolerated the traffic. As you know, Lori is now CEO of Westchester County Land Trust, and I'm sure she's been before your board or planning board or many boards in Westchester County, and you know her very well. I would think at this point you might want to ask me, well, what's the difference between who owns it? But I'll go a little further. As I stated before, the previous owners all had regular positions, regular jobs, and the tennis was just kind of an aside for them, and whatever income they received, it's somewhat different than what's going to happen now. This person, the tennis pro, I'm sure a lovely guy, he may be connected with another tennis company in possibly Manhattan. They have many locations. It's now becomes, instead of a residence with a tennis court, it becomes a tennis court with other structures, and it's a totally different atmosphere. There's a pool for a tennis camp if you want to have a tennis camp. There's acres and acres of walking trails. So it's no longer just a residence. It becomes much more than that. Supposedly, it was only going to be 1 or 2 people that he's going to teach, but really, 1 or 2 people with tennis is really not going to pay the bills on that property. It's a high-maintenance piece of property, buildings, lawns, trees, structures. It's just 1 or 2 are not going to do it. So the commercialization of this property will have a very negative impact on all of the people in the area, especially the people in this town, right in Town Hall here. And we already have a nonprofit convention up the road, and in the most beautiful house on the street. And This action, if approved, will further devalue our properties. The brief submitted by the attorney left out several things. In the brief, it states that there is only a spigot for water, but it also fails to mention that there is a complete locker room with toilets, showers, sinks for their people to come in and take care of it. The permit for this, how they got it, seems incomprehensible to me.
Excuse me, where is that bathroom, locker room, and
It's,
showers located?
it's walking distance from that. It's in one of the structures there.
Yeah, because one of the questions I had is if people are coming there and they have to use the bathroom, where are they going?
Yeah, there's a whole facility for them.
Okay.
Okay,
well, I don't know.
Also, they failed to mention that there's a single lane road going in and out of that. So if two cars are going in opposite directions, they can't pass. If a busload of children came in, it has to cross a pond over a very small, narrow bridge. Disaster, you know. So there are some real safety issues here that have to be recognized. And I think the letter, it should be, the appeal should remain from 1973, should remain in effect. There's no reason to change that at all. So, thank you.
Okay, thank you, sir. Sir? Once again, if you could give us your name and address, please.
Sure. Hi, I'm Neil Feinberg, and I'm the Saintly Tennis Pro. So my address is currently 177 Main Street, East Hampton, New York. And I just wanted to get up and let you see who I am and talk about what my dream was. I came onto the property in 1998 and just fell in love with it. And I saw the family that was living there, and they were raising a child, and I'm a tennis pro, and I just dreamed of one day buying this place and raising a family there myself and teaching. Just to correct a few misconceptions, I do teach full-time, and I only have 2 clients. When I lived in Westchester, I never saw the sort of ultra-high net worth clients that I would find in New York City, but they exist. I'm not bragging, I'm not saying I'm rich, I'm blue collar. But I teach the kind of people who, one boy plays 7 days a week, another family has a brother and sister, they play 5 days a week. I teach only 2 clients, and that's my job. My vision for buying this home is to move there with my soon-to-be fiance and start a family. But in terms of the tennis, would be to immediately reduce all of the traffic and all of the use by at least 50 to 75%. I would not want to have a lot of cars coming on and off of my property if I were to own it. I hear all of the concerns of everybody in here about the traffic, completely. Sorry, I'm a little emotional because this is just something that I've wanted and dreamt of for decades. And I feel the emotion in the room, and I just want you to hear where I'm coming from, regardless of what the outcome is, which I'm clearly powerless over. There's an aspect that people are forgetting here, which is who this facility really serves. And it serves the people in Somers. Most of the people who play in this facility are seniors who play in doubles groups, and it's their primary, some of them their only form of exercise. My father, who recently passed away at the age of 88, lived as long as he did because he played tennis twice a day. And there have been numerous studies that show this sport, more than any other, prolongs life. Now that's perhaps a side issue. The issue of whether a tennis pro is a skilled person versus a profession came up. I'm not sure what that was related to, but I just do want to clarify that I am a professional. I am a member of the United States Professional Tennis Association. I am a certified member and have been one for decades. So if the issue of skilled versus profession needs to be clarified, it is a profession. There are associations and organizations that license tennis professionals, and that I'm one of them. Alan Lane, who was the instructor who began this facility, he was an instructor, and he coached a few kids, just like me. So I believe it's consistent with the original use of the facility. The question as to did the town turn a blind eye and know what was going on, there is no tennis facility on anyone's private property anywhere in Westchester County of multiple courts that is not used other than for the purposes of private instruction. And if you can find one, show it to me. It was clearly an attempt to give him a blessing to teach his lessons, but to do it quietly, don't disrupt the neighborhood, and don't annoy the neighbors, which is my full intent. I'm happy to answer any questions, address any concerns from any people who are scared of who is this monster who's going to buy this place, what's he going to do to our neighborhood, is there going to be traffic? I mean, the idea of buses of kids coming through here, I understand the concern. It's not even a remote possibility of a camp, of instructors living on the premises. It's just never going to happen. It's me, my soon-to-be wife, and a couple of rich kids I teach. That's it. The premise of my business model is true, that I deal with a few whales and not 1,000 minnows. I did run a tennis club in New York City where I created the most affordable tennis program in all of Manhattan that a lot of people use. Out here, it's the exact opposite model. There are no indoor tennis clubs, or courts, I should say, within 15 minutes of that area. So the tennis playing community in that area is underserved, and it does fill a need in the community. I just want to see if there was anything else I wanted to say before I sit. This business of it being a dwelling or not, no one lives there. It's clearly not a dwelling, the tennis structure. But it is the equivalent of what a studio would be for an artist or an architect. Clearly, a tennis pro cannot teach tennis lessons in his living room or the basement or the attic. That's obvious. So the only place a tennis pro can teach lessons is inside an indoor tennis court. So I think you've heard everything about who I am and what my intentions are, and I don't want to disrupt the neighborhood. I just wanted to come back up to Westchester, where I grew up, which is the place that I love, to play roots, raise a family, and teach a few people tennis. Yes, if you have any questions, please.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Yeah, we really don't do questions like this. I mean, yeah.
Okay.
It would be any comments have to go into the microphone. So, we've got to do this one at a time. So.
I'll just wrap up by just saying that
people can come up and ask questions if you want to come back later on. I'd like to get through everybody at least once.
I understand. The reason this whole hearing, I'm probably the pain in the butt that forced this whole hearing, because I wanted to be transparent and above board in all ways and on all levels, and start my relationship with the town on good footing. I didn't want to buy a piece of property with covert hidden purposes and try to fly something under the radar. It would be disrespectful to my neighbors. It would be disrespectful to the town. It's not a way to start business anywhere. Everywhere that I've ever taught tennis, I have a club in the Hamptons right now. We give free classes to seniors with Parkinson's. We do community service. We take care and help everyone in the town. Okay, this is hearing tonight's discussion made me glad that I quit the practice of law to become a tennis pro, because this is what I want my life to be, is on the court. With all due respect to all attorneys here and all the sound legal arguments that I heard tonight, I want to be on the court making a difference in people's lives, inspiring people, giving them, helping their health, and that's where I'm best suited. So if anyone has any personal direct questions for me, I'm completely available. I just wanted to go on record and let you see who I am and let you know what I'm about. And that's it.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. Hi, sir. If you could also give us your name and address.
I think I was next, right?
Sure.
So it's Steve Pietropalo. I'm at 4 Hilltop. I live directly behind the applicant's property, and my wife is the one that asked about the roof, and it was immediately taken care of. We've been living here 20 years. I'm a professional engineer. I don't work out of the house, but I am a code expert, and I have some opinions about the interpretation of the building code, and I disagree with the building official. I have no objection to the application. They're great neighbors, so I hope the board considers it.
Okay. Thank you, sir. Yes, ma'am. Would you like to come up?
I am Romaine Gunther. I live at 15 Orchard Hill Road, directly across from the private road. All these years when I was married, my ex-husband, as far as the traffic was concerned across the street, told me to shut up and mind my own business. Now that I'm divorced, an hour and a half, every hour and a half, there's between 2 and 4 cars coming out of that driveway. Okay? I have to say, Lori seems to have cut down the time. There were times when some jerks were there at 2 o'clock in the morning, coming out at 3. You know what my bedroom was like? A psychedelic dance hall. Did I appreciate that? And if I understand correctly, people were giving papers about the property. I never got a copy, and I'm directly across from the mess. And all these years, every property owner had said to me, oh, don't worry, we're not going to have a business. I worked at Pepsi in Purchase. One of the other secretaries said to me, oh, you live on Orchard Hill Road? That's where I play tennis. I said to myself, what? And she paid to play. That was not supposed to be that in the beginning. So now I'm telling you how I feel. I don't appreciate that, and I don't believe any man that tells me otherwise anymore, because, oh no, I'm not going to do that, and damn if it doesn't happen again. Enough is enough. Okay? I need my sleep too. It's not fun when they come out of there with their bright lights, and when the road bumps were in the way, oh my God, that was something else to be desired, you know. And then Helmut Kirker came over, who owned the first piece of property on the left. He said to me, oh, can we use your driveway? I said, what for? He says, we're going to take out the bumps. I said, thank you, Helmut. I said, you don't know what my bedroom looks like when those damn things were up. So I feel you should reject this application. Enough is enough for me. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Yes, sir?
How the heck does this work?
James Rieger. I live at 2 Catherine Place. Okay. I live about, I guess, a half mile from the entrance to the property that's being discussed. And I'm glad. I work in schools, and if you go into a school, there are 2 areas that are kept far away from classrooms: the gym and the chorus music section. And that's the way it should be. And that's why in a residential area, there should not be even the slightest possibility that an area that's commercial, like your gym and your music area, should be placed in an area where people live, a residential area. They should be separate. I would think that if the gentleman wants to give lessons and his heart is set on it, he finds a place on Route 100, someplace in a commercial area in town, where that can be done, not on Orchard Hill Road. Thank you.
Does anybody else wish to speak in regard to this? Sir, please come up.
I'm Dennis Pastena. I own 2 properties on Orchard Hill Road, one of which abuts the tennis court property. I can see the tennis court from my deck. I would like to know, with all these promises and so forth, who's going to be the policeman? Who's going to monitor the facility? And for the edification of council, Cornell University does offer a degree in horticulture and agriculture. Thank you.
Sir, anybody else wish to speak in regard to this application? Sir, please come up.
I'm Robert Siegel. Our house we moved into about 22 years right here, diagonally across from the driveway that accesses the property. row, the woman who just spoke, is our next door neighbor.
Yes.
And Jerry, who spoke earlier, is also on the other side of that property. I appreciate the town lawyer and this board for looking out for the town for the long term. We've heard that over the last 25, 30 years, this property has had a number of owners. So as wonderful and honorable as the prospective buyer is and what he's going to say he wants to do with this property, what happens to it 5, 10, and 15 years is the responsibility of this board and this town, and not to be taken by his word of what he expects to do. He also has a mention of a difference of what he's doing, saying he has 2 clients, and then talks about how the people who are using the court are Heritage Hills residents and all of the work and the programs that he has with his other business. I believe, just from a simple Google search, he's associated with Gotham Tennis or something to that effect. When you do a Google search on the property, a tennis company comes up with offices in New York and in the Hamptons as a commercial business. Once you approve this as a commercial business, then you're going to have, as you mentioned, tennis parties. And all of a sudden you have 25, 12-year-olds coming to a tennis party, and their parents are picking them up and taking them off, and picking them back up. When we're told about how infrequent the tennis is being booked at this point, you have to also remember the 80-20 rule. 80% of the business is done in 20% of the hours. That means the tennis court is used at dinner time, early in the morning. You've got 2 to 4 cars coming, 2 to 8 cars coming in every hour, and 2 to 8 cars leaving at the top of every hour, and then that happening every hour. So you don't have just the 4 cars for the 4 people playing. You sometimes have 6 or 8 cars for doubles, and they have to come and go. And then there's another group coming in right behind them at the busy hours. That's my primary concern, is the amount of traffic that comes in and out of this road. The headlights we see every car as they make a turn to proceed down onto Orchard Hill Road. When we bought the property, we were very concerned. The large house was being developed by the DeVitos. We came into this building to look up to make sure that there were no commercial applications, there were no commercial structures on Orchard Hill Road or in our neighborhood, and we found none. So it was a surprise to us when we saw cars coming in and out of this driveway all the time, to be told, oh, there's a tennis court back there. True, we're across the street here. We do not see the tennis house itself. It is protected behind trees, so the visual of the structure and the size of the structure has never been an issue for us. It's just the comings and goings, and making this a commercial application, there'd be no control over it in years to come. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, sir. Would anybody else like to speak in regard to this application? Anybody else from the audience? I want to try to hit everybody at least once before we go back to repeats. No? Okay. Would you like to speak again?
Thank you. So there were a list of questions that were asked, but frankly, we have understand the sense of the board. We understand the sense of advice from council and the sense of the neighborhood. And frankly, Ms. Zenzinger and Mr. Kubler are not interested in pursuing an application that is going to be so distasteful and objectionable to their neighbors. And she has asked me to say, we're not even going to ask you to render a decision. We'll withdraw our application. We see where it's going, and we'll just leave it at that. I mean, we don't see any purpose in even trying to address some of these comments.
Okay, that's the prerogative of the applicant. If you'd wish to abandon it, you can certainly do that. Okay. All right, thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, I'll just wait for everybody to leave, and then we're going to go to the third item on the application this evening. Please, our meeting is still in session. I'd ask everybody to please take your discussion outside so we can continue with the meeting.
Who's left? Oh, one guy. Okay. Oh, two guys.
Please, everyone, I'd request that you take your discussions outside so we can be respectful of the final applicant. The meeting is still continuing. Thank you.
Jim, hang on a minute.
Sit. I'm all right.
Just give us a few minutes. Just take a seat for a minute.
All right, I'm gonna stand for a minute though. That's all right. I've been sitting for a while.
Help yourself.
Doesn't show the bad bottom. Since I got in the chair.
You're supposed to sit on it.
So you sit in
Please, I'd ask everyone to please take the conversation outside. We'd like to continue with the meeting. Thank you. We're going to go to the third item on the agenda this evening. This is of Crossroads at Baldwin Place. This is an application for an area variance for a sign that exceeds the maximum size in a neighborhood shopping district at 57 Route 6, Baldwin Place. Sir, if you could just give us your name and describe your application, please.
Okay. My name is James Polinsky. I'm from the sign company Signs Inc. in Yorktown. We're representing the client. What we're looking for here is a size variance. We're not looking to move any closer to the road or anything of that nature. We went to the Architectural Review Board. They love the look of the sign. So our main focus, or the main thing, is our property, or the section of the property is right on Route 6. We're down in a little ravine where the sign's going to go, where it was approved by the site plan. We're not looking to move it from there. So we were just looking to make the sign a little bit larger so as you're driving on Route 6, you can see the tenant panels a little easier. They have 14 tenants in the property, and we were just looking for something a little bit larger that can be read as cars are driving by at a safe distance.
Okay.
I think that's pretty much the gist of what we're looking to do.
It looks like the permitted sign is 4x5. Would you agree with that, Tom? That's what's permitted in this zone, a 4-foot by 5-foot sign? Okay.
Tom, how much of that is the pedestal included in the 4x5 dimension?
I would not interpret the pedestal to be included in the dimension.
So just the part that carries
The sign itself.
lettering and such.
Okay, so you're looking for basically that it turns out to be, I guess, like a 5 by
5 foot by 8 foot.
Yeah, something approximately. Yeah, maybe a little bit larger because of that. Yeah. Okay.
Vic, I'd like to go on record as the secretary of the Architectural Review Board is saying that normally the Architectural Review Board would send a memo
Yes.
to the zoning board, which you'll notice was not included in your packets. The reason it was not included in your packets is because we need, after a decision is made tonight by this board, the applicant is going to have to go back to the Architectural Review Board because they still need to have some additional discussion about the pedestal. So I just wanted everybody to be aware of that. They didn't want to send, saying we're in full support of the entire thing because, the owner of the property, Mr. Carney, is aware of that, and they will be coming back, depending on what this board decides, they will be coming back to the Architectural Review Board at their July meeting.
Do the ARB have any problem with this? Did they voice any concern about the size of the sign, or?
They did not.
I wanted, if I could, I wanted to add one more thing.
Sure.
There's information. The top section that says Crossroads Plaza is not going to light. It's just going to be a letter. And this type of sign that we're going to be putting up, it's going to be an illuminated sign, but what we consider call a stencil cut sign. So only the white letters will light. Everything else is going to be a solid aluminum background.
It's internally lit.
It's internally lit, but only the letters themselves light. It won't be a flashing panel. It will be similar to what Somers Commons has up the street at the lower level. So it's a blacked out panel, or in this case, it's going to be a brown panel, and only the white letter will illuminate.
There's no exterior spots on this or anything like that?
I'm sorry?
There's no exterior spotlights on this?
No, nothing like that. So because what you want to do actually in that case is you'll have the dark background and you'll just have a bright white light that you can see just the lettering. So if you put a spot or anything like that, it kind of cuts down on your contrast where you won't see that as well.
Right.
So you just want to see the letter glowing at night with the business name.
So they'll pop and you can see them.
Pop, and that's it. Yeah. So it won't be a full light box where it's the whole white plexiglass is blasting you in your face.
Very unattractive, yes.
That's not what we're looking for here.
Right.
We try to do something that's very nice. We're going to use the brick to match the building for the base. So we're trying to do something that really fits in. It's 15 feet back from the road.
Yeah, I couldn't tell from the site plan where exactly the sign. Oh, okay, I see it now.
It's actually all the way to, if you're looking at the building, it's to the left of the entrance and exit. And it's down in a little ravine. It looks like there's a little tree that's there now. I don't know if it's a birch tree or something like that.
How big is the building? Square feet? Do you have an idea?
24,000.
About 24,000 square feet. And it looks like you're looking for a 14-panel sign. It looks like 3 larger panels, then 4 smaller ones on each side.
Oh, it's going to be
14 altogether.
Yeah, 14 total. Yes.
Right.
So of the 14 tenants, how many of them would also have a sign on the building itself?
Just the lower level. Yeah. So it would just be, or the 6 actually. I believe it would just be the top 6. That's why they're larger, because they're storefront signs, and then the other ones are the office spaces that they won't have signs on the building.
So we'll have approximately 6 signs across the face of this. Those would likely be
correct. Which
interior
there's
lit.
one that's there already. I'm sorry, I don't have it on my picture, but Purple Orchid. It took this. Actually, there's a few, right? And Keller Williams and Purple Orchid. So there's a sign ban on the building that was part of the site plan and design of the building that they hold the signs, but there'll be nothing. So there's the office space will just have the smaller panels. So if they want to do J&J accounting or whatever, that's all you'll see is that name light up at night.
But those smaller signs or the second floor will not have signs on the building.
No, there's no space for the signs on the building.
And Tom, as far as you know, those signs have been approved for on the building, right? In addition to this standalone.
Yeah, not all of them yet. The ARB has seen 2 of them. I think
my company put up Purple Orchid, which we got the full permit and everything for. I don't know who else
Keller
is.
Williams was done. We have Bobo's Cafe coming, so they're not all done yet.
So the purpose of this sign that you're putting up is to catch people who haven't noticed the sign on the building?
Well, it allows, most plazas have both signs, one out by the road and one sign on the building. So most plazas have that. And in this case, we're gonna have, there's gonna be 8 tenants that don't have a sign at all on the building.
And then 6 who do, max. Are you fully leased there at this point in time, or do you know if they're fully leased?
We have
Tell us who you are.
Sean Carney from Carney Realty Development Group. We have potentially 1 retail store open. We have an LOI but no lease, and 2 offices open.
Okay. Okay. Has ARB approved the internally lit with just the letters being visible?
Yes, everything that says Crossroads Plaza and down, and the 14 panels, they are totally okay with all of that.
All have been approved.
They just have to come back, the Carneys have to come back and discuss that pedestal base with them. There was some discussion on, how wide this top piece was gonna be in order to accommodate, like you could open the back or you could slide.
Right, which we
inside and out,
which we
in and out,
figured out that,
slide.
we figured that we can do everything and remove everything from this side. But it was more when we were at the meeting, it was whether or not the base of the sign, the base of the brick is gonna be 18 inches wide or 24 inches wide at the bottom, and then what the cabinet is the thickness of the cabinet. We proposed 10 inches, but they weren't sure if they were gonna wanna beef it up a little bit to just give it a little more, really just side profile look to it. But the face of it, itself, they had no problems with.
Right.
It's just maybe just the thickness of it.
Right. Because, to me, approving a large sign that's all white paneled and it's going to blare at you is very different than approving maybe a larger sign where just the letters are lit.
Well,
you know, and it's not gonna be as, you know,
This is also very similar to what Erstad Biddle just did down the street. Yep.
yeah,
Yep.
internally illuminated and just.
We do a lot of work in the area, we do a lot in Somers, we kind of know what you guys like, and what all towns are actually going for now is get rid of those light boxes and get something that's just a little bit nicer. The signs on the building are the same way, they're just, they're a very classy looking sign. Just trying to do it, make it look nice.
Right.
We're right in Yorktown, so
Now, the orientation of this structure, this Crossroads Plaza structure, is perpendicular to the building? or-
correct. It's a double-sided sign, so it's perpendicular.
So it's perpendicular to the building, can be seen from either way?
Correct.
I mean, I mean, I think that the building has excellent visibility from Route 6, and you will have those, whatever it is, 6 or 7 storefronts will have likely 12-foot by 2-foot signs on each of them. So given that, there's also a stoplight there, so that it's fairly close to the road as compared to, say, a Somers Commons, which you actually can't see the stores, so those pylons serve a different purpose. So I'd like to see it be a little closer to code, given that the larger panels, you know, are going to cover the storefronts, which already have tremendous visibility to Route 6. So I would like to see it a little closer to code.
Well, I think the idea of the pylon, I think that's why so many stores do them, and so as you're driving down the road, you kind of catches your eye and you see it, that you're not turning, looking into the shopping center trying to find what you're doing at 55 miles an hour, 45, whatever it is there. Most plazas, well, I can't really think of many that don't have a directory sign out front. Whether it's small, single.
Yeah, I'm not saying
row
you shouldn't
stores.
have a sign out front. I'm just
Right.
saying it should be to code. That's all.
So, and I could say that at a 12-inch by 27-inch, you might end up with, if you have 2 lines of copy, or maybe you're at a 4-inch letter, you know, which is not going to be a huge letter, you know, because you're always going to have a little bit of space. Maybe you lose 3-4 inches into space. So at 4 inches, I don't think you're going to have a giant letter. Or even if if you do it, since you only have 27 inches, you're still going to have a small letter, because you're not going to be able to fill up unless you have like an Ace Hardware and you just put Ace, you can get a good size, maybe 10-inch letter. Anything else is going to shrink because it's going to be proportionate. So I feel like even at 12 inches by 27 inches, you're probably going to still be around a 6-inch letter.
Are you going to cut in logos or just straight text?
If they wanted a logo, we would put a logo.
And the logo will be not colored, then it will only be white.
That was we didn't even discuss that at the last meeting. But if that's something they wanted, we could just keep it all white.
I think that the intention was that it would just be letters only.
So then it would just be letters.
Yeah, the white letters, I think we.
So no logos, just the white letters. I'll go on record saying that.
I mean, the sign is bigger than what the code allows, but the building is also a pretty large building, so kind of taking that into account here.
And like I said, it's also, you have a sidewalk, you're 15 feet back, and you're down in a little hill there, where it was put on the whole site plan from the beginning.
Now, I see like it's a little indentation down. It looks
goes
like it
down
goes
a
there
little
after the
bit.
driveway.
Correct.
Yeah, I'm looking down in there.
Correct.
That's on the side of where the gas station is.
Correct.
Right.
So if you're looking at the building, it's to the left of the enter and exit
Right.
driveway for the property.
Okay. What I'd like to do is just ask if anybody here in the audience wishes to speak in regard to this application. Okay, before I, nope, okay. Anything else you wanted to offer at this time? Any other comments? Other questions from the board? Maybe we should have some discussion. I don't know what we.
No questions. My feelings are the sign is larger, but I think it's tastefully done. I think it's done in the same manner that we approved recently for Chico's. I would be opined to grant the application provided that it's all white lettering, no logos.
I think I'm of the same inclination, if it's internally lit with the white lettering only, because of the size of the building, you know, and it's, you know, if this was a big white light box, I would say like, wow, this is way too big, it's gonna, you know, people are gonna crash into this thing with all the light coming out of it, it'd be ridiculous. But if it's just the letters, you know, I think that's, to me, I think it's reasonable, and if ARB has looked at it and is okay with it, then I think I would be okay with it also.
So this may be a purview of the ARB, but would that comment be more about uniform font? Or say Bobo's, I think their logo is like cursive, lettering, Bobo's Cafe. Could we have that just all white, no colors, or a uniform font for the lettering when you say no logos?
I think that.
No logos, so everything would be
Uniform.
throughout the sign.
That's fine.
I think if it's not, my concern is it's gonna be distracting, trying to determine different logos and.
So we could work with the ARB and pick a font that they're happy with.
I mean, if it's going to be simple font, then I just think there's an awful lot of unnecessary space. I think it could, if it's straight text, then I don't think you even need to use near this amount of space to cover that. If you're putting in logos, I might understand a little bit better, but with straight text, that's even more of a reason that this sign doesn't need to be this big.
Wouldn't logos be more recognizable though, as opposed to having to read the text?
I'm not opining on the logo point. I'm just saying if they said it's going to be straight text, then I would think you would need even less room.
Keep in mind, Tom, like for example, it'll say purple.
I would have been okay with logos, but
Purple Orchid Salon, Bobo's Cafe. You know, it's not just salon.
I think you're gonna end up, because
but you're talking about if everything's going to be uniform, right? So Bobo's Cafe, right?
Which is
letters might be on to get 27 inches wide. Those letters might naturally be 8 inches high, but
it wouldn't fit. You would have to do it on 2 lines. So you would have, because just 27 inches, you're not going to have enough to fit Bobo's Cafe. You're going to have a lot of dead space, so it would probably be like Bobo's Cafe, you know, same font. And like I said, with your dead space of, you're going to get trim and retainer and everything else, you're probably going to end up with maybe a 5-inch letter, 4.5 to 5-inch letter. So you have Bobo's Cafe, Purple Orchid, that's probably all they're going to fit, or just Salon. Maybe they wouldn't even put the name, and then that would give you a little bit more space.
Yeah, I almost feel like the design of the letters and logos, I'd almost leave that up to the purview of the ARB. And then, you know, I mean, I think as long as we get internally lit and just the letters
white.
or the logos
Yes.
are lit, yes.
Everything else is going to be a solid background.
I mean, that would be my opinion, but, you know. I mean, generally the ARB approves it, I generally like what they're doing, so.
I'm generally happy with it the way it is. The land tilts down a little bit. This is going to be put down a little bit, so they probably added to the size of the sign to make up for the decline in the property.
As well as the setback.
Right.
I mean, it's a long building too, and to me, it's a lot of building.
Yeah, it's
If it's
good sized
24,000
building.
square feet, it's gotta be 12,000 on each floor here, right? That's what we're looking at?
Yeah, pretty big.
Yeah. So, I don't know, what do you think, Ron? You think we're on track here, or?
I think so.
Yeah. And Tom, you're thinking it's a little too big, though?
I mean, again, I just like to, in general, as you've heard me with other signs, I like to try to keep signs closer to the code. I think this one in particular, you know, there have been, obviously there are some signs that we've made just a little bit bigger, 6 inches here, 8 inches in one small portion of the sign. This seems to be one where, and in most cases where we do approve a larger sign, there would also be some real visibility issues we've seen before. So this is a very visible building that will have a lot of illuminated signs on its face, which is fairly close to Route 6. So I thought this would be a good candidate to try to keep it much closer to the code. But that's usually where I go when we come down on signs.
How much are we over? The code regulation would be
4
what?
feet too tall.
4 by 8?
20 square feet.
Yeah, it's 4 by 5 is what's allowed. This is 8 by 5. So yeah, 4 feet taller than the code normally would allow.
Considering the number of businesses that are there and the space you have to work with, I'd leave it the way it is. It's okay to.
Do you expect 14 different occupants here? I mean, if you have somebody that comes in and wants half of the top floor, I assume you'll rent it to them.
Happily. So right now we have 2 tenants that have taken multiple spaces. So we would blank some of these, like the lower ones we would blank out.
They would just be
and then-
black and dark and that's
Yep.
it?
The aluminum, the brown aluminum, and then if those tenants move out, we then have the option not to go in for a new sign, just to replace those panels.
Yeah, but 14 would most likely be your maximum tenants you'd have in the building.
Correct.
On a realistic basis.
Yep.
Sean, just for the record, just so that you know how that works, if a tenant leaves and a new tenant comes in, that does require a new application before the ARB.
Okay.
Just so that you're aware of that.
Is the entire building commercial?
Commercial, yes. The second floor is office and the first floor is retail.
The 2 tenants that are taking multiple spaces are on the first floor, you're saying?
One's on the second floor and the
Okay.
first, and one's on just the first.
So the first floor is divided into 6 or 7 sections as
see
well,
it
just
there,
like the
yeah.
bottom?
Correct.
Okay.
There's 6.
How do you get to the second floor in this building? through
So-
the doors in the center?
Around the rear is a lobby, very nice.
Okay.
Address, oak stairs, elevator, and that's kind of like the office lobby. So
Okay,
that
on the
doesn't.
back of the building.
Yep.
Okay, I was wondering because it looks very retail in front, and I don't see, you have to go through a retail store, I think, to get to. But that's
we
how you
didn't.
do
We
it.
didn't want all the office staff or customers parking in the retail spaces too. So the whole second floor access is in the rear of the building, which looks like another front of the building.
Right. That kind of makes good sense.
Yep.
Good.
And it flows well.
That's why you don't take up all, you said, the retail parking spaces, which retailers need, obviously. All right, so, I think we have to make a decision on what we want to do. I think I'm of the inclination that I probably would approve it as is, unless other board members don't think we should do that.
So would I.
You would? I know Tom wants a little smaller. What do you think, Melissa?
I would approve it as is.
Ron?
Yes.
Approve it as is?
Yep.
Okay, because we need 4 to pass, so. Okay, are we ready to vote on this?
So,
All right, take a motion as the type of action.
make a motion as a type 2 action.
I'll second.
Mr. Carboneto?
Aye.
Ms. DiPolito?
Aye.
Mr. Harden?
Aye.
Mr. Newman?
Aye.
Chairman Canestra?
Aye.
Thank you.
Can we have a motion as to whether we're going to accept the application as presented?
I
Maybe-
move that
Maybe
we-
with the proviso just that it's internally lit, as
Right.
indicated by the
Well, that's
applicant.
what he said.
Right,
Yeah.
right.
Yeah, I propose that we accept the application as proposed, assuming that the internal lit is, what you talked about is what they've got.
Just the lettering's being.
The lettering's just.
Second.
Mr. Carboneto?
Aye.
Ms. DiPolito?
Aye.
Mr. Harden?
Aye.
Mr. Newman?
Nay.
Chairman Canestra?
Aye.
Thank you.
Your application's granted.
Thank you very much.
We have to do the minutes.
Okay, yes.
Minutes from June.
All right, so last item on the agenda this evening is the approval of the June 11th, 2019 minutes. Has everybody had a chance to review them? I'm just going to approve by consensus. All in favor of approving the minutes?
Yay.
Aye.
Any opposed? No. Okay, so our June 11th, 2019 minutes are approved. I would like to make mention that our next meeting is September 17th, 2019. We don't have an August meeting, so that's the next time we'll meet. Any other issues or anything else we have to discuss? Any other questions or concerns? If not?
No.
Okay, so we're going to conclude the meeting at this time, and everybody have a good rest of the summer, and we'll see everybody in September. Thanks and good night.